Don Vito, the rise and fall of Vito Genovese. Flush with victory, Genovese moved to consolidate his gains. He called for a grand meeting of Mafia bosses to formally recognize the new order under his leadership. In November 1957, mob leaders from across the country answered Genovese's call and quietly gathered at a secluded country estate in Apalachin, New York, the home of Joseph Barbara, a Pennsylvania boss. Dozens of high-ranking gangsters arrived in expensive cars, ostensibly to enjoy a barbecue and discuss business. On the agenda was the division of territories and the booming rackets of the day, especially narcotics, which Genovese was pushing aggressively onto the national agenda. It was a gathering unlike any before, meant to be a triumphant coronation for Genovese as the preeminent leader of La Cosa Nostra. But Don Vito's grand conference would prove an unmitigated disaster. The small town of Appalachin was not prepared for an influx of luxury cars and suspicious men in tailored suits. The sight of so many outsiders aroused the curiosity of a New York State trooper named Edgar Croswell, who had been keeping an eye on Barbara's estate. Smelling something amiss, confirmed by deliveries of an unusually large quantity of meat to the house for a barbecue. Local law enforcement decided to take a closer look. As the bosses convened, police units swept in and raided the property. Pandemonium ensued. Mafia dons in fine suits bolted into the woods and cornfields, fleeing on foot for any cover they could find. Over 60 mobsters were detained or arrested trying to escape the Apalachin Meeting. Genovese himself managed to slip away in the confusion, but the damage was done. The incident made headlines around the country. A conference of gangsters exposed in a sleepy hamlet. For decades, J. Edgar Hoover and other officials had publicly denied the existence of a national crime syndicate. Now there was irrefutable proof. The Appalachin summit blew the Mafia's cover sky high. Genovese's bid for underworld glory had instead shone a spotlight on organized crime that would only grow brighter. In the Mafia's view, Appalachin was an unthinkable blunder. Lifelong gangsters who prized secrecy were dragged into the spotlight, their names and faces splashed in the news. Genovese had intended the meeting to cement his status. Instead, it made him a law enforcement target like never before. The FBI, embarrassed by having ignored the mob for so long, launched a fervent crackdown. A national spotlight now fixed on Vito Genovese, the boss of bosses who had unwittingly invited the wrath of the government. The fallout from Appalachin was swift. In the months after the raid, Genovese found himself hounded by authorities. Federal agents and police disrupted his operations and flipped lower-level members of his network. Genovese's greatest prize, control of the H-trade, now became the instrument of his undoing. In 1958, Vito Genovese was indicted on federal narcotics charges, accused of masterminding a vast conspiracy to import and sell brown. The prosecution's star witness was a small-time drug dealer named Nelson Cantelops, who testified that Genovese had personally met with him to organize drug deals. Whether by genuine investigation or with some help from vengeful underworld rivals, the government had finally cornered Genovese. In 1959, after a dramatic trial, Vito Genovese was convicted of narcotics trafficking and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The mighty Mafia boss, who had spent decades avoiding punishment for countless murders and rackets, was now shackled and sent to prison for peddling drugs. It was a bitter irony. Genovese had long pushed brown as a path to power and wealth, only to have it land him behind bars. At the moment of his sentencing, his reign atop the underworld effectively came to an end. Genovese never regained his freedom. He ran his crime family from his cell as best he could, issuing orders through emissaries, but his empire slowly slipped from his grasp. On Valentine's Day, 1969, at the U.S. Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Missouri, Vito Genovese died of a heart attack, still a prisoner at age 71. The end had finally come for Don Vito, closing a chapter of Mafia history. Yet even in his final years, his actions continue to reverberate through the criminal world. Genovese's relentless quest for power left a complicated legacy. In many ways, he achieved his dark ambitions. For a time, he was the most feared mafia boss in America, with an international narcotics empire and the underworld at his feet. But his methods also sowed the seeds of destruction for the secret society he helped lead. His appetite for dominance led directly to the Appalachin fiasco and the exposure of the Mafia to public scrutiny. And in prison, Genovese's own terror over potential traitors inspired one final drama that would further damage organized crime. In 1962, Genovese suspected a low-level soldier named Joseph Valachi of informing and allegedly marked him for death. Fearing for his life, Valachi decided to save himself by becoming an informant, the first made man to publicly testify that the Mafia existed. In 1963, Valachi spilled the mob's secrets before a U.S. Senate committee, laying bare the structure, rituals, and leaders of La Cosa Nostra. These revelations, combined with Appalachin's fallout, dealt a crushing blow to organized crime's golden era. The government now had both the evidence and insight to relentlessly prosecute the mob. Vito Genovese had dreamed of being an untouchable boss of bosses, yet his legacy was to become a cautionary tale within the mob. His ruthlessness and betrayal, the very traits that propelled him to power, also made him enemies who ultimately helped bring him down. A man who thought himself untouchable ended his days locked away and isolated. All his underworld victories turned to dust. And yet, the criminal empire he once ruled endures in a form that still bears his name. The Genovese crime family remains active today in New York, a testament to the lasting imprint of its infamous former boss. In the end, Vito Genovese embodied the paradox of the Mafia itself, built on loyalty, yet riddled with betrayal, seeking wealth and power, yet inviting destructive notoriety. His life was a saga of violence, intrigue, and ambition run amok. It's a story written in blood and whispers, from the alleys of Little Italy to the halls of power in Rome, from clandestine meetings in rural upstate New York to the final clang of a prison cell. Don Vito's rise and fall not only shaped the New York Mafia of his day, but also heralded the end of an era when the mob could operate from the shadows. His story remains one of the most dramatic and cautionary tales in the annals of American true crime. The life and times of a mob boss who reached for the crown, and in doing so, dragged his underworld kingdom into the light. If you've enjoyed this video, why not give us a follow? Like the video, and let us know what you think in the comments. This has been The Outlaw Factory.